Joining me now, first class father, Victor Boyce. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you so much for having me, Alec.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Let's start like this. How many kids do you have? How old?
Well, I have two. My daughter is going to be 22, and my son left this earth at 20 years old, almost 4 years ago. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, very sorry to hear that, Victor. We're going to jump into that in just a second here. But for my listeners who don't know, please take a second to hit them with a little bit about your background and what you do.
Well, my background is my personal background was I was in sales forever. And long time ago, when my son was very little, he started to dance at preschool, and that led to him going out on auditions for print ads because some other kids that were dancing were doing that. And fast forward, he was on a TV show, a bunch of movies. He did a whole bunch of things for Disney. Because of him, I got to travel the world. And so I left sales, kind of became dadager for a long time. And so my son has some notoriety. I think the last time I looked, he had millions and millions of followers on Instagram, even though he's not posting obviously anymore. So I don't even look at that anymore. It's too hard to look at. But thank goodness I still have my daughter because she is my everything. My whole dad essence and aura is all into her. And she's going to be a senior in college next semester. So I'm very proud of her. And that's what's going on with me.
Yeah, incredible, Victor. And so take me back, if you could, to the beginning of this story then for your fatherhood journey about 22 years ago. As you said, how old were you when you first became a dad, and how did that experience change your perspective on life?
Oh, my goodness. So my first child was my son. I was 35 or 6. I think I was 36. So I was a late dad. Some of my friends had kids when they were 20 years old, which was not really good for them, being kids themselves. So I was lucky enough to be a little more mature when I had my first son. But the thing is, kids don't come with a manual. And so I was like, not really understanding how serious of a job fatherhood was for a long time until I think when my son went to preschool. And then I realized what I realized was he is an individual. He is his own person. He is not mini me. He is not, he's already like, not fully formed, but he is born how he's going to be. Like I recognized that later when he was older, that he's the same person as he was in preschool, just more evolved. So, the fatherhood journey for me has been, I'm sure for every dad, it's all learning all the time. Because as soon as you think you know one thing, then they grow into another phase. It was supposed to be the terrible twos, but for me, it was the terrible threes. He was great at 2. 3 was the one. And then I had my daughter. So now that's a whole different experience because it's kind of different for a dad, at least speaking for myself. Girls and boys were completely different. My wife would accuse me of having favoritism towards my daughter, but it wasn't that. It's just that I thought, sons needed a certain way and daughters needed a certain way. So it's just all learning all the time, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Victor. We have 4 kids ourselves, and
Wow.
3 boys. Then we have 3 boys. Then got the girl on the 4th try,
Yep.
who was a huge fan of the Descendants and your son in those movies. So,
Good.
but it is different. It's definitely a different dynamic, especially when it comes to disciplining them as well. But and obviously, unfortunately, the tragedy here with your son Cameron, he died of sudden, unexpected death in Epilepsy Patients. How many people are affected by epilepsy in this country, and how often are they dying from the same circumstances as your son did?
Well, from what we know, 1 in 26 people will be affected by epilepsy, whether directly or indirectly. Either they will have it, or someone they know, or their family member will have it, and that's a fact. As far as SUDEP deaths, the problem is we don't really know how many people are dying because oftentimes when someone dies of SUDEP, it's not reported correctly. Like they may be on their death certificate, may say they died of a heart attack, or they died of drowning, or they died of something else, but they don't report the SUDEP because either don't know or they don't want to. There's many different things that we're trying to figure out and fix, because without having the correct number of people, if it's not diagnosed correctly or not reported, I should say correctly, then research dollars don't get funneled into that. So it's really important from our perspective to have those deaths correctly reported. It's many more than are reported is the answer to your question, but I don't know the actual number.
Yeah, wow, incredible. And so when did you guys first become aware? When did you first become aware that Cameron was suffering from epilepsy? And did that kind of take you back by surprise? And then you start figuring out, hey, investigating this to see what could be done, and what was the kind of treatments, if any, that he was undergoing at the time?
Okay, well, surprise is a total understatement. We were completely blindsided because Cameron not only was he perfectly healthy, but as you know, he was doing his thing. He was acting. He's a great athlete, dancer. A lot of people that have epilepsy have seizures multiple times a day, and they're seriously affected. Like they can't do a lot of things, especially children. But Cameron was not affected at all, and he didn't have his first seizure until he was 16, almost 17. So the first seizure was not only a surprise, but like why? Like we were so confused. And when we took him to the doctor, well, it was an emergency. We took him to the doctor right away because we didn't know what it was. I didn't know he had a seizure. And so when they told us he had a seizure, I was like, why? Why did he have a seizure? So they gave us a little pamphlet with a little bit of information. And the doctor said, I'll never forget this. He says, sometimes you get a free seizure. You have one and that's it. And so he kind of minimalized it. And so I was like, oh, great, that's good news. And sure enough, he didn't have another seizure for 13 months. So from the time that he had his first one to the second one, I literally forgot about it because he never had another one. Then when he had the second one, that's when it got super serious. And that's when technically you're diagnosed as epileptic. So you can have one seizure in your life and not be considered epileptic because seizures can be caused by many different things. Lack of sleep, drug use, on and on. There's lots of reasons why. Stress, you could have a seizure. But if you have more than one, then typically you're considered epileptic. So at that point, then we're going to the medication route and EKGs and tests, and they tried to induce seizures and all these things. They tested his brain. They never found anything. Like sometimes you can see like a little abnormality in the brain, but they never found anything in his brain. And then again, the second seizure to the third, it was almost a year. It was like he had one a year. So when you have so few, it's really hard to pin down the medication. It's hard to pin down the causation, why he has a seizure. Some people, like strobing lights will cause a seizure. There's so many different kinds of epilepsy. It's really, really complicated. But with Cameron, it was especially complicated because he had so few in his life. So from the time he had his first one to the time he had his last one, I believe he only had 5 total, which makes it really hard to figure out. So it's super frustrating for us. Again, ginormous understatement, but for people suffering epilepsy, everybody's situation is a little bit different, and there's no magic cure, there's no magic bullet to fix it. So what we're trying to do is narrow it down a little bit through research dollars to figure it out, because you can have epilepsy and never die of SUDEP, or you can have epilepsy and die of SUDEP in a year, and which is, it's really a hard thing to deal with.
It is incredible to me that, especially in 2023, with all the advances we've made scientifically, that we still have so many unknowns about this. And is this, I know you have the Cameron Boyce Foundation going. Is this the main goal of this is to fund research into the epilepsy? Tell me about the foundation, the start of it, and what the goals are.
Well, the start initially was to continue Cameron's things that he was passionate about. He was passionate about arts. He was passionate about, he didn't want gun violence. He was really passionate about, he worked a lot with the Thirst Project to get wells for people who are suffering from water insecurity. So that was our initial thing, because he died so suddenly and he was doing all these things. We're like, he can't just die and that's it. So we wanted to continue his causes, so to speak. But then it came clear to me, like, epilepsy took my son's life. I think we need to do something more about that. I mean, that was part of it originally, but it wasn't the main part. So once we decided we're going to shift our focus completely to trying to do something about epilepsy, originally it was to raise awareness, because the thing about epilepsy, unlike cancer and some other things that happen to people, other serious diseases, epilepsy didn't have a familiar face. epilepsy didn't have you know, oh, that he has epilepsy. So, wow, that I didn't know. And maybe I'm not so out of the ordinary. Like epilepsy has a stigma to it, and it's like swept under the carpet. You don't see that with cancer or other serious diseases. So unfortunately and fortunately for Cameron's face and notoriety has really helped us get traction really quickly as far as the foundation goes. I mean, we're tiny compared to like Cure, which is a really big epilepsy foundation, and we partner with them to help find researchers. But because Cameron's notoriety and his youth, we attract people that other organizations don't. And we have, for us, an obligation to continue that and to get traction, to get research dollars, and mostly awareness. And my personal thing is to try to really dissolve and get rid of the stigma, because we know there's other high profile people that have epilepsy that don't talk about it. They don't come out of the shadows. And it would really help if they did, because then, like I said, more research dollars will go to it. More people will donate. More people will connect with those people as individuals who probably are suffering or are one of the 1 in 26 that we know have it. And just come together as a community in epilepsy to really do something about it.
It's such scary stuff, and God bless you for what you're doing. I can only imagine the difficulty of doing this while you're still grieving this loss of your son and having to be a constant when you're talking about epilepsy every time that you do it. And what was it, Victor? What was it like for you? What was the struggle like for you as a father, dealing with the loss of your son while still trying to be a father for your daughter? What was that experience like, trying to make sure you could still be a dad for her while you were grieving your son in that whole process?
Man, there's no easy answer to that, man. There's just, I think when something like this tragic happens, and it happens to everybody, I don't feel special that I lost my son. It happens. Everyone loses a loved one. Unfortunately, a lot of people lose their children as well. I mean, we've met so many people that have lost their children as SUDEP. The difference is my son had a public persona. So because of that, I'm constantly bombarded, for good or for bad, with oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. So I'm constantly reminded. So it's really a heavy burden. In addition to just losing my son, that is a public loss. It's a global loss. Cameron was known worldwide. He has fans all over the world, and we get messages, and I really appreciate it. I really do. But constantly being bombarded doesn't always make me feel good, because, like I said, I can't just even relax just for a second. Thank goodness for my daughter, because if I didn't have her, no kidding, I think I would spiral into depression, like, for sure. It was hard enough to lose my son. If that was my only child, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't even really know. I can't even imagine to put myself in your shoes. I know you said there's so many. I think I would think it has to be somewhat beneficial to have other dads, other parents around you that have gone through this, that can actually understand what it is that you're going through, and to be able to share these kind of moments. And again, the importance to bring this awareness around, and progress has been made, but still so much unknown to it. And to bring more, to shine the light on it, I think is really a blessing to so many other parents out there who may be afraid to speak up, but at least there's a place they can go to get some more information. And I think that would be the key. Once they first find out, like you did, what the heck is going on here, at least there's some place they can go to get the information.
You hit it exactly. And that's one of our things. Like, we felt like we didn't have a place to go, because we didn't. I mean, maybe there was something, but not so specific like for our situation. And what we try and do is make it dynamic. We try to make it accessible. We try to make it relatable, because there's a lot of like I said, Cameron was relatable. Cameron is known. And so people, especially children that have it, they probably watched him on Disney, and it was like, wow, if he has it, maybe I can get some help, or maybe I don't feel so weird, or maybe, my mom or dad can donate, or just something like that. Like I said, we attract people who would never, ever ordinarily be talking about epilepsy. And that's what we need, is we need it to be mainstreamed. We need it to get out of the shadows, like cancer, like Parkinson's, or pick your disease. epilepsy to this day is still the most common disease that's the most least talked about.
Yeah. Well said. And let me bring it back. I know we were talking before about the difference between disciplining sons and daughters. Take me back then to you growing up with them. What type of disciplinarian were you as a father with the kids growing up? And is that different than the discipline style you grew up with?
Yes. Okay. So the discipline style I grew up with was old school, the belt, the switch, which, it's funny when you ask that, because originally when Cameron was about 2 or 3, and my first instinct when he did something wrong was to spank him. And I did spank him once or twice, but then I'm spanking him. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? This didn't work for me. And then I realized I could just talk to him. I could just tell him, explain to him why this was wrong, why you shouldn't do that, what the consequences of this were. And it really blew my mind, like how much more he understood that than me just whacking his little butt. But one thing I did learn with my daughter was I could just say, and you can ask her, I would say, Maya, I'm going to pop that butt. I would never hit her, but I would just tell her that, and then she wouldn't do it anymore. So that worked for me. But I don't believe in spanking. Everybody's got their own style. I'm not telling people what to do. But I grew up getting spanked, and it was like more than spank. It was like old school, like a really bad whooping, we used to call it. And it's like, you don't want to do that to your kids, because they're much, much more intelligent, and they can understand things much more than we used to think. We read early to our kids. We put our kids in preschool. We sang in music in the house always. I think that's why my son was so musical. He grew up with music from an infant, and these things all get into their little brains, and they are super, super smart. Even when they can't articulate certain things, they know things that we would put it past. My parents probably didn't understand how smart I may have been as a child, because they didn't think kids could be. But I know how smart they can be. And I always tell young parents, always read to your child, always sing to your child. Don't baby talk like people walking goo goo gaga. No, speak words to my child. Don't do that goo goo gaga stuff, because that's gibberish. Because they will understand what you're talking about, even if they can't tell you. It will come out later. And when I look at my daughter, I talk to my daughter, she boggles my mind how intelligent she is. And it's not by accident. It's because we have enforced these things since an infant.
Yeah, great stuff. My father had me when he was 50 years old. He was born in 1930, so he came from a completely old school generation as well. So his style of discipline, obviously, and what happened to me, like when the very first time I was spanking my son, my oldest son, when he was a kid, I remember thinking about the guilt that I felt from doing it, thinking like, did my dad feel this way? It didn't seem like, if he did, he really hit it, because he didn't seem like he cared whatsoever. Like, I'm like, was there any emotion like that whatsoever? It's hard to believe. And I agree with you. Like it just seemed like it wasn't for me. So it was something that I did do, but never relied on as my discipline going forward, because it just wasn't me. But I often wonder, like, dads back, because 90%, Victor, of the dads that I bring on this show, when I ask them the discipline question, almost all of them grew up with the belt or the switch or whatever it may be, the paddle, whatever. And all say, hey, I don't do that to my kid. I wonder if it's just because I wonder sometimes, how could they have done it, but it didn't seem like it mattered to them.
You know what, the paddle, that's crazy that you say that, because even when I was in school, in elementary school, if you got in trouble at school, they would send you to the office and whack you with a paddle. Can you imagine sending your kids to school and the teachers are beating your kids? That's how we grew up. Like, they had this, it was I don't know what kind of game it was. It was a wooden paddle, like a big ping pong paddle, but it had holes in it. So when they would whack you with that thing, it would suck your butt in, and that was nuts. This is somebody else beating your kid at school. Yeah. So none of that is happening with my children, like no freaking way. But that's how we grew up. That was old school, and like, no. Yeah. You have to evolve as a human. You have to understand that things, just because that's the way they were, doesn't mean they're correct. And the same with our thing, with the epilepsy thing, like people used to think epileptics were possessed, or they were witches or something, like, and people still think that in many parts of the world. So we have a long way to go to overcome a lot of crap to get to where we want to be, which is a cure for epilepsy.
Yeah, definitely.
It's going to be super difficult. I'm not minimizing it. It's not like we're going to go presto change or we're going to cure it. It's super duper complicated. And like I said, there's like 40-ish something types of epilepsy. SUDEP is a byproduct of, it's not even epilepsy, it's a byproduct of epilepsy. So that's a whole nother can of worms. But the fact is that we have to put more eyes on it, put brilliant minds on it. There's scientists and people that are working, really smart people. I am not an expert in any sense of the word. I am just a grieving father who happened to have a son who has some notoriety. But there's really smart people working on it, and we need even more. We need even more, and we need people to continue to donate, continue to talk about it. And please, if you're someone who is a public figure and happen to have epilepsy or have it in your family, please come out and tell us about it so we can get more people on board to relate to you. Whether if you're a football player or a baseball player or a NASCAR driver, whatever, come out and talk about it, and let's stop hiding, because that's one of the biggest problems that we have.
Yeah, right on with that. And yeah, those super smart people that are working on it scientifically and all that can't do it without people like you bringing awareness to it. Now, I know we have, Epilepsy Awareness Month is in November. What are you planning? What's the foundation? What do you got planned for November?
For us, every Epilepsy Awareness Month, we try to do more in the way of fundraisers. We try and come out with fresh, we have to keep people involved. So fresh merch and things like that, and shirts, and always wear our purple. Purple is the color of epilepsy. We have our annual fundraiser usually late May, early June, because that's when Cameron's birthday was. So that's when we do that. But Epilepsy Awareness Month, we just push hard for fan integration, and that's what we do. It's for us, every day is Epilepsy Awareness Day. Every day is. So, and I don't know, it sounds like, I don't know how to put it. It's not like Epilepsy Awareness Month. It's like Black History Month. To me, every day is Black History Day. We have to have a month like that. That's just kind of minimizing it to me. I think we need to push every day and keep it in the public eye daily, 24/7, 365. It's because it's not going to get better unless we always push.
I love that. One of the things I constantly say on this show is every day is Father's Day for me. So I constantly push that as well. It's not one day where I'm like, oh, today's my day to be a father. So exactly. I agree with you there. All right. Well, all the links to the foundation, your socials will be in the description of today's podcast episode. And I really encourage all the listeners to at least, if not for anything else, check it out and share it on your socials. At least we could do that. That's the least you could do. If not donate, share it on the socials, because spreading the word can mean so much. So I really encourage all the parents listening to do so. And last thing I want to hit you with here, Victor, I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about to be father who's out there listening?
Be present all the time. And like I said before, always talk to your kids, even the infant. If you think they know what you're talking about, they do. They just can't talk back. So always talk to your child, always sing to your child, and tell them you love them every day, because you never know what's going to happen. I know that sounds cliche, but trust me, you never know. I'll tell you this. The night before Cameron passed, we went to dinner, and thank goodness, because the last thing I saw him go into his house, and last thing I told him was, I love you. And he went in the house, and that was it. Just imagine if I didn't see him before, like, it would just be even worse than it already is. It's already devastating. So always tell your child you love them, and just be present.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. It's been an honor for me. Victor Boyce, you're a first-class father all the way. And thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here in First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you too, Alec.